Elgin Baylor was the biggest name in Washington, D.C. basketball when I was growing up.
Elgin Baylor was once described by Lakers teammate Jerry West as one of the most spectacular shooters the game has ever known.
Elgin took his play to another level in Game 5 of the 1962 NBA Finals when he set the record for the most points ever scored in a finals game. Baylor's 61-point outburst helped Los Angeles to a 126-121 victory in the game, although the Celtics went on to take the series and the title in the 7th game.
I don't think he ever got his credit. I don't think anyone ever got their credit back then. The game was a completely different game. He was one of the game's modern players. I think I was too. We were athletic, could run and jump and do things other people couldn't do. Yet, people look at his accomplishments, and because there weren't any championships associated with it, there wasn't any kind of recognition. That was a quote said by Jerry West when talking about his teammate and longtime friend Elgin Baylor. Sadly, he passed away on the morning of March 22nd, peacefully, through natural causes. Baylor was one of the greatest players of his time, and like Jerry said, he helped set the foundation for the future of basketball. A guy who was 6'5", 220, a small forward, but very versatile and could play bigger than his size, and also as quick and agile as any guard of his era. Unfortunately, he never got the recognition, certainly not as much as West himself. While Jerry went 1 for 8 in the NBA Finals, Baylor went 0 for 8. He lost in the finals once with the Minneapolis Lakers and 7 times in LA after they relocated. 7 of his 8 losses came against the Boston Celtics, and 1 of them was against the New York Knicks. How's it going, folks? My name's Andy, and today, let's talk about Elgin Baylor. A guy who's been long forgotten and rarely ever comes up in conversations, despite being one of the most impactful players of all time. So, who is this guy? Everyone knows his name, but few know his game. Baylor came into the NBA during a time when the future was uncertain. Professional basketball was in its very early stages, and the popularity of the sport was fluctuating from year to year. Nobody thought it would ever reach the same level as the MLB or the NFL. Baylor, born in 1934, it was a different time. Growing up in DC, like many other places back then, it was segregated. Despite growing up very close to a recreational center, African Americans were banned from playing basketball there. So Baylor did not start playing basketball until high school at the age of 14. There weren't really any options for him, as most of the blacktops where he was allowed to play at, they were run down and not maintained at all. Even in the nicer parks, they were reserved for the white kids and chained off when they were done playing. Baylor stated, "The older kids would sneak in at night over the fence and play with whatever light they could get. But most of the time, we just played stickball in the streets." Not just the neighborhoods, but the schools were segregated too. Baylor attended an all-black public high school and joined the basketball team. He grew to love the sport and quickly rose up the ranks, becoming the best player in school. In fact, he was the first ever African American to be named first-team All-Metropolitan in DC. However, he got a stunning lack of coverage despite dominating on the court. Not only were the schools segregated, but he only played against other black basketball teams from other all-black schools. There'd be times where he'd drop like 40 points, but all the news headlines only talked about the white basketball players, most of whom were nowhere near as good as Baylor himself. I know we all were very annoyed that these white teams were always rated above us in the papers. We'd be undefeated and ranked about 10th, and we're saying to ourselves, how can that be? They didn't even play us. We wanted to play the white schools to find out if they really were better, and we didn't feel that they would be. However, Baylor and his team at Spingarn High School overcame this. He forced everyone to pay attention to him. In his senior year, he scored 63 points in a single game, setting a record for the district, and he averaged 35 points for the entire season. That's when the news, the whispers, started to circle around DC. Players, kids, everyone started to realize this guy, he's the real deal. Even to this day, Baylor and many of his contemporaries of his era are credited for lifting up Black Americans onto the basketball stage. And as the segregated schools started coming to an end, they were given the spotlight to shine. He was a true game changer on and off the court, a person who set the foundation for the future of the sport, where everyone has the opportunity to make it big. Baylor continued to ride that wave of emotion into college. He led the Seattle Chieftains to a Final Four appearance and put up roughly 30 and 20. At this point, it was clear that Baylor would be the #1 pick. The Lakers took him. I mean, normally if you get drafted by the Lakers, it's a good sign, but the team was going through a tumultuous period. After a decade of dominating, they fell off hard. And back then, if a team wasn't good, they weren't getting many fans, and thus financially, they were in trouble. For a few years, Baylor's arrival reignited the franchise. In his rookie year, he led Minneapolis to the NBA Finals. After that, they relocated to Los Angeles. According to Lakers owner Bob Short, if Baylor did not join the Lakers in the time he did, the team would have likely been defunct, and he would have been bankrupt. Throughout his NBA career, Baylor has been absolutely dominant, always near the top of the leaderboards in scoring. Even at one point averaging 38 points a game, he still couldn't muster out a single scoring title. The league back then was a lot faster. Players were running and gunning, the pace was significantly higher, with teams getting way more possessions compared to nowadays. The duo of him and Jerry West was, at the time, an incredible revelation. Nobody believed it was possible to win a championship unless you've got the best big men in the league. But here, you have the Lakers, a team led by a small forward and a combo guard. We've never seen two smaller guys dominate in such a spectacular way. Baylor was the predecessor to the ideal small forward every team today wants. A guy who can literally do it all, a crazy rebounder and a great passer who changed the way everyone thought a wing player should play like. He was 6'5", but built like a Mack truck. The strength he possessed was very rare back in the day, during a time when basketball players were not hitting the weight room as frequently as today. Baylor bullied players 4 or 5 inches taller than him and used his massive frame to overpower smaller guys. He truly looked like he could play in the modern NBA. In terms of pure size, skill, and versatility, he was the prototype of LeBron. Now, this comparison might be far-fetched, but I think it works out. Anyway, while Jerry West was considered the best player on the team, Baylor was not too far behind. In some years, it was a toss-up, but when it came to leadership, he took charge. From an ESPN article, it stated, "For most of his career, Baylor was the team leader off the court. He was the focus of most conversations. He was the one who began discussions, turned them joyfully into arguments, and then made the final judgment of the disputes, whether whimsical or serious." Baylor finished his career as an 11-time All-Star and 10-time All-NBA, but the championship has always eluded him. Actually, he was quite close to winning it several times, but in all 8 of his appearances in the finals, he was just a hair short. An Achilles injury in 1970 would soon end his career. An argument can be made that maybe he does deserve a ring. In the 1971-72 season, shortly after the arrival of Wilt Chamberlain, the Lakers finally won the championship. However, Baylor retired after just playing 9 games that season. So technically, he was part of the roster at some point in the season the Lakers won the title, but he retired before the playoffs started. It's kind of a gray area whether or not he deserves to be called a champion. But I'll tell you what, he was a champion. He was a man who broke through barriers. From living through segregation to saving the Lakers from a financial crisis to his revolutionary playstyle, Baylor had a tremendous impact on all aspects of the sport. It's guys like him who paved the way for the future generations to succeed, similar to someone like Bill Russell. If it wasn't for him taking basketball to the next level, maybe it wouldn't be as popular as it is today. Maybe we would have never seen guys like Michael Jordan or Julius Erving take the reins. Now, everyone says rings aren't a big deal, but in terms of legacy, it is. You gotta admit, it really is. If Baylor even won a ring or two, there'd be more people talking about him. Going 0 for 8 is tough. Heck, even Jerry West was 1 for 8, and he's still remembered fondly. But don't let his lack of rings dilute your perception of him. He was one of the greatest game changers, one of the most important people in the history of the sport. That's all, folks. Thank you all so much for watching, and rest in peace to the great Elgin Baylor. Let me know where you'd rank him on the all-time small forward list. I think he's for sure top 10, possibly even top 5, but it gets kinda dicey from there, so I don't know. Let me know in the comments. I hope y'all enjoy the video, and of course, as always, I'll see you next time. Peace.